Hi everybody, Steve Farmer bringing you continuing coverage of my games from the 2014 Millionaire Chess Tournament. This is held in Las Vegas, and we're going to look at my round 3 game. You just saw my 2 losses in round 2 and 4. And this game is an interesting game. I won a pawn in the opening, managed to win a second pawn, but it was a tight game. But I nevertheless held control of the game from beginning to end. But the end is rather controversial. I had 3 good games at this tournament, what I would consider good games, considering all the rust I had. In one game, I had a 1 position against the Sicilian defense with bishop g5 and bishop c4, which I had suffered a tremendous loss to against Hamilton Cruz Fialos. But I managed to handle this one right. And it was a long, tough battle, and I had a winning position, but in such severe time pressure, I had let it go to be a draw. And in this game, well, the last game was a good game too, round 7. That was against a good friend of mine from Tucson and my road crew member and teammate, Ed Yetman, where I was able to sack a queen and win the game. So that one was pretty nice to end up the tournament. But this game that we're going to look at here was probably actually one of my favorites, except for the way it ended. Now, I did end up winning, but it's controversial as to how that happened. Oh, by the way, on the screen there you see Wesley So playing Alejandro Ramirez, and Hyundai managed to hold him to a draw. And now you see the screening of the players coming into the hall. You would have to surrender your cell phone to a check station, and they run you through a metal detector to deter cheating. When you were done with your game, you would get your hand stamped so that you can come back into the terminal and watch the games being played if you were to leave. But you can't leave without having a stamp on your hand, and you can't get a stamp until your game is over with. So that was interesting. Here's a view of the playing site. There I am wandering around the aisle right there in the brown shirt. Also, this tournament was a bit painful because I had so much rust to knock off. But it was fun to watch all these good players. Right here we see Jeffrey Young playing the white pieces against Jian Chaozhou, who is rated 27-19. And in this little video clip, we're going to get to see the end of that game. So I'm going to let the video play all the way through that. Jeffrey's a fine young man. He's 14 years old. I chat with him on the ICC when we're watching the chess league going on. Jeffrey is part of what makes the University of Dallas team very difficult to beat in the chess league. They have a very strong team, and he is a big part of that. Kind of makes me think that when I was 14, I played in my first USCF rated tournament. I played in the North American Open, and I went 0 for 8, ended up with a rating of 1108. And back in those days, they only had the annual supplement came out with players' ratings, and I checked all the ratings that there were, and I was like 11th from the lowest at 1108. Nowadays, that's not anywhere near the bottom. Okay. Looking at the game here between Jeffrey and Zhou, you can see that Zhou has a pawn on A2 ready to promote. But you can't see it too clearly, but Jeffrey's got his rooks and a knight and a pawn up on D7. Here he just checks, the king goes back. Actually had a mate there that he missed, but Jeffrey had something else in mind. And watch his confidence in handling this game. He reaches for the, goes to grab the queen, thinks better of it, but he might as well grab it because he's going to need it soon. And now, yep, he grabs a queen. Just a little intimidation on the young man's part. Kid's got a lot of moxie. And he plays knight to a7 check, so that after the rook takes, he'll play rook to d8 check. Yep. And after pawn takes, or after rook takes, pawn will take and promote. So Zhao resigned. Alright, so let's get on with my game from the Millionaire Chess Tournament that was held in Las Vegas 2014. In this game, I have the white pieces against Calvin Hori, and Calvin, I think, is around 1900, somewhere around there. So I play e4, c5, d4. I remember me into Morra, c3, and now he plays g6. And this is what I was talking about. I realized that I'm going to have to get a whole repertoire set up for lower rated players because I've never, ever, ever seen g6 played. Now you can always say, okay, well, I'll deal with that when I see it. But it would be nice to have some kind of inkling as to what's going on here. So I played bishop c4 so that if he does take, we just transpose back into a known Morra Gambit, and he doesn't take, and he plays f6, knight f3, and now d5. And according to the database, this is a novelty, but we're comparing to two A players from Paris in 2009 where bishop g7 was played. And after pawn takes d5, pawn takes, and bishop back. White ended up winning, but you know, they're only A players, so we can't take it as a grandmaster's theory that came up with this. In this game, Calvin played d5, which is probably the best shot, and I took, he took, and now I'm able to take on d4. Nice little in-between move. Because the rook on h8 is hit, so he plays knight to f6, and now I can take on d5. So I've managed to win a pawn, and the point here is if he checks, he did not do this, but I can just play bishop to e3, and now we can do this sort of thing. Yeah, so this is fine for white. He's a pawn up, he's doing okay. So he decided he'd try and get castled as quick as he could and played bishop g7. Now, I think the wisest move here would be to check and really force him to give up the castling rights. I missed this. I played bishop back, hoping to trade queens. Just all I wanted to do at this point was get into a simple endgame where I'm up a pawn and just press the advantage until eventually he cracked and I'd win the game. Castled, I took, he took, I castled, played knight c6, bishop e3, bishop f5, knight to d4. And now he plays knight to a5. Probably best was to trade on d4, though this doesn't look joyful for black. It's probably his best shot. And white's a bit better. Instead, he played knight a5, and I took his bishop. And now he took on b3. I took, he took, I took a pawn on a7. So I'm 2 pawns up. And now rook to a8. Now the best move here, and I knew the computer would say this, the computer is going to say bishop e3 is the best move. And that's the idea I have, but I wanted to give him a chance to slip up, and I played bishop c5. The chance for him to slip up is to play rook a2 too quickly. And now comes rook to d1, and he's got problems. If he goes bishop f8, we got rook back to here. So some big problems if he plays rook a2 too quickly. But he didn't do that. He saw that coming and played knight e4, which basically allows his knight to get into the game with the tempo over the main line of playing bishop to e3 right away, instead of here on the second move of that line. Now he plays rook to a2, f3, creates an artificial lift for my king, knight f6, bishop c1, bishop f8, and now b4. All I'm trying to do at this point is limit the scope of his pieces and then work my way around to getting that pawn advantage on the queen side to pay off. He plays knight to d5, I play knight a3, knight to b6, knight to b5, and here he plays king to g7. But going back, it's probably wiser to play knight c4, but I think white is still good after this, after knight to d4. The point being is he cannot take on b2, because of rook f2, rook a1, and now knight to b3, covers the bishop on c1, and the knight on b2 is hanging. So he'd probably play bishop g7, knight takes f5, knight takes b2, take the bishop, king takes, and bishop e3. And this just looks like a pretty trivial win, actually, for white. He's 2 pawns up, or I'm 2 pawns up. In the game, he played king to g7, and I went rook d1, king g6, b3, rook a1, king f2, rook a2. Okay, what I'm doing here is I am extremely low on the clock. We're at move 27, and I have about 50 minutes left to make it to move 40. And I'll be damned, I ran into time trouble in this tournament where I've not run into time trouble in many, many years. It's probably been a decade since I've been in time pressure. So I was feeling it in this tournament. So I repeated the position as much as I could. And, you know, my opponent was blitzing out the moves too. He realizes, hey, I'm 2 pawns down, but I have an edge on the clock. So he kept going fast. What I should play here is just king to e1. And if he goes rook to a1, then I can go knight to c7. The threat pretty much is just to push the pawn up the board, given the first opportunity, the c pawn. But during the game, after king e1, I didn't like the look of rook takes g2. But it turns out this is quite playable, because now I get my bishop into the game, hitting a piece here. And if he plays rook takes h2, I can take the knight, so of course he's not going to do that. And if he plays knight to c8, then rook to d8 is going to win a piece. So yeah, I didn't even see that in this position here. My mind sort of shuts down, I found, when I'm playing in time pressure. So I have to play more blitz tournaments. I have to play more blitz games, period. Plays rook a1, I played bishop b2, rook a2, now f4. So I wouldn't repeat the position too many times. I'm just trying to get to a comfortable margin before time control, before I set into plan what I want to do. Now, I should just take on d5 right away. I did not, but let's look at that. Takes, king up, and of course you can grab the b pawn, but still a pawn up with active pieces. I think white's going to win this pretty easily. In the game, I played bishop c1, and now he plays rook a1. Rook takes d5, rook takes c1. Important position to remember. So I played king e2, rook g1, king f2, rook c1, king e2, rook g1, king f2, double question mark, rook c1. And actually you'd say threefold repetition, right? But this move gets a triple question mark, because he made the move, punched his clock, and then claimed the threefold draw. Now, I was not too clear whether it was threefold repetition or not, because on the first move of this position, he took a piece. So I was not clear as to whether it was threefold repetition or not. So I went and grabbed the tournament director, who came over, and he looked at the position and goes, so you're claiming a threefold repetition? And my opponent said yes. And he said, so you made your move and you punched your clock? He goes, yes. And he goes, in that case, it's not a threefold repetition. What you need to do is actually pause the clock, go get the tournament director before you make your move. Tell him you want to do a threefold repetition. He comes over to the board, explains what's going to happen. The player starts the clock, makes his move, and then it's a threefold repetition, which is what this should have been. However, given the situation that he made the move and punched the clock, it is now a draw offer. And of course, I had to decline the offer because in the first place, I didn't think it was threefold repetition, and we never even got to that point to determine whether it was or not. That became a moot point when he played his move and punched the clock. You know, looking at it now, the position, actually the physical position does repeat 3 times, but with the first move taken on c1, I don't know. I still don't know. I would assume that it is technically a draw if he had managed it right. And since it was now a draw offer, I declined the offer and he resigned on the spot because I had several minutes left to make 2 more moves, which get us to time control. And at that point, it would be a rather easy thing to figure out the win from there. All right, I kind of feel bad about taking a half point away from Mr. Hori. And my apologies. I hope I didn't offend you during this game, but it is what it is, and we both learned something that night. Alright, that's it for this one. I am barely squeaking by here. I got 2 wins and 1 loss out of 3 games. Alright, tune in for round 4. I'll bring that as soon as I can, and until next time, good luck.